Thank you, Dr. Leela. These people are amazing people. I'm just so inspired by the testimonies that each one has been given and the stand they've been taking. And I just wish all Christians, and especially our church, would listen to these voices and recognize something that is very prophetic and very profound. And we're going to look at these somethings, these principles in Daniel, Revelation, and Matthew chapter 24. I hear a lot of our church leaders and a lot of members, even and Christians, saying, this is not the mark of the beast. This is not the mark of the beast. And we need to save all of our ammunition, so to speak, and for the mark of the beast. But what we find in Daniel is before there was a test on worship, there was a health test, and that's Daniel chapter 1. That's where we are now in principle, because a lot of these prophets wrote for our time, upon whom the end of the world are come. That's what we're told in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And so we need to recognize that all these prophecies of the past that have had fulfillment have principles, ideals that help us to navigate the present and the future. Daniel tells us that before there was a worship test, there was a health test. That's where we are now. And if we're not going to stand during this health test, how are we going to stand during the worship test? Now, the book of Daniel is understood to be a twin of the book of Revelation. In fact, they connect together in so many ways. They talk about the same powers, earthly powers, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the terrible beast, all outlined in Daniel chapter 7 specifically, and again in different symbols in chapters 2 and 8 and 11. And then connecting to Revelation chapter 13, which is really significant, really powerful, because Revelation chapter 13 describes two earthly powers. They're described as beasts because that's a symbol of an earthly power. Two earthly powers that work together in the end of time. And I want to read to you just a couple of verses. Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. All right, we're going to stop right there, because what we're recognizing in this verse is a transition. We have a power here that comes out of the earth. Now, we understand as Seventh-day Adventists that this power, this earthly power, is a symbol of the United States of America. We can go into a lot of details about that, but we don't have time right now. But this power is represented as having two horns like a lamb, lamb-like principles of liberty and freedom, conscientious freedom. The principle of civil liberty and the principle of religious liberty is what is symbolized here in these two horns like a lamb. These are the principles that have made this country great, a beacon of light to the whole world, a beacon of freedom to the whole world. But then it says in the same verse, this lamb-like earthly kingdom and power is going to speak like a dragon. That's a transition that's going to take place. Now, we haven't gotten to verse 12 yet. We haven't gotten to verse 13 yet. We haven't gotten to verse 14 yet. We haven't gotten to the mark of the beast yet. We haven't gotten to the enforcing so that no man can buy or sell yet. We're still in verse 11. That's where we are right now in prophetic history. We're in verse 11. And verse 11 says there's a transition that's taking place, that this earthly power that was lamb-like, freedom of religion, freedom, civil freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, etc. Those are going to change into a dragon-like powers, dragon-like principles. And that's the transition we see taking place in America right now. And for our church to be silent on this, for our fellow Christians to be silent on this is absolutely unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable. We need to recognize that prophecy right now is fulfilling. Now, we're not at the mark of the beast yet. We've said that several times, but here are brave people who are already feeling the dragon-like voice, and they're already sensing, they're already experiencing the consequences of that dragon-like voice, even though we haven't got to the issue of worship yet. Jesus tells us the same thing in Matthew chapter 24. We want to look in Matthew chapter 24, and there's three basic stages of development that take place. Matthew chapter 24 is one of those end time chapters that parallels the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel. Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13. The three stages of deception are earmarked by Christ's warning not to be deceived. The first one is in Matthew 24, verse 4. Many will arise, many false prophets will arise, many will arise saying, I am Christ, and deceive many. Don't be deceived. Matthew 24, verses 4 through 11 is the first stage of development, actually verses 4 through 10. In that stage, it reads like a newspaper. Let me just read you a few of the verses here. So powerful. And Jesus answered, verse 4, and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. That's what we're hearing right now. We've been hearing that. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in different places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And then it says in verse 9, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then many shall be offended and betray one another, and shall hate one another. Doesn't that read like the news today, what's happening in our world today? And that word pestilence, which is actually missing from a lot of modern translations, but it's there in the King James and the New King James, that word pestilence means a disease. A pestilence that is going to cause people to be afflicted, and that word afflicted means to be pressured. So what we see here taking place is the first stage of deception. We're not at worship yet. We're not at the Sabbath issue yet. We're not at the abomination of desolation yet. That's in the second stage, in verses 11 all the way down through verse 23. But in this first stage, we are there because we're seeing natural disasters. We're seeing fire. Sorry for that drop in our internet, but I'm not sure where I got dropped, but I just want to say, just to summarize this, Matthew chapter 24 gives us 3 stages of deception, and we're in the first one. Natural disasters, rumors of wars, pestilence, infectious disease, famines, pressuring, coming from all nations, pressuring in South America, in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, in North America, in Central America, all over this world, people are being pressured because of pestilence. That's where we are right now. We need to recognize that if we can't stand now, how are we going to stand in the second stage and the third stage of deception? The second stage being in the issue of worship, the third stage actually being the personation of Christ by Satan. He's going to show up on this earth in different places, claiming to be Christ, claiming to have made changes in God's law of worship, and deceiving multitudes of people. So when we look at all of these principles, Daniel chapter 1 comes before Daniel chapter 3. The health test comes before the worship test. Matthew chapter 24, the first stage of deception before the second stage of deception. Revelation chapter 13, the transition from the lamb-like principles to the dragon-like principles before the worship issue comes into place and the mark of the beast is enforced. We're seeing all of it right now. We're seeing this transition taking place. All of this right now is prophecy being fulfilled. And we need to wake up. Our church needs to wake up. People need to wake up. We need to realize that these last movements are going to be rapid ones. And this is not about trying to save our ammunition for the future. We need to stand up right now for liberty of conscience, for freedom of conscience. Again, it's not about being vaccinated or not being vaccinated. It's about coercion. It's about force. It's about mandate. It's about standing up against these principles that are dragon-like and standing up for the principles that are lamb-like.